Some artists spend their entire lives chasing fame, only for the world to finally notice them when it's already too late. In hip-hop, death has a strange way of turning underground rappers into global icons overnight. Streams explode, albums debut at #1, and names that once lived in comment sections suddenly become legends. In this video, we're breaking down rappers who only became truly famous after they died, and one of these stories still doesn't sit right with fans today. Tentacion. Before June 18, 2018, XXXTentacion was known, but he was nowhere near the level of fame he reached after his death. While alive, X existed in a controversial space. He had a dedicated online fan base, particularly on SoundCloud and YouTube, but he was also battling serious legal issues and industry resistance. Major radio support was limited, award show recognition was minimal, and much of the mainstream media coverage surrounding him focused more on allegations and controversy than his music itself. At the time of his death, Tentacion had released only one studio album, 17, which debuted at #2 on the Billboard 200. That was impressive, but it didn't make him a dominant mainstream force yet. His second album, which was named as just a question mark, had dropped just months earlier and had strong streaming numbers, but he still hadn't reached global superstardom. He was polarizing, unpredictable, and still seen by many as an internet rapper rather than a fully established industry heavyweight. Everything changed the moment news broke that Tentacion had been shot and killed during a robbery in Deerfield Beach, Florida. The footage of his car sitting motionless, combined with TMZ reports and police confirmations, spread across social media within minutes. Fans refused to believe it at first, refreshing timelines and comment sections in disbelief. Within hours, his music began to surge at a level nobody had seen before. Songs that had been quietly performing suddenly exploded. Tracks like Sad and Moonlight climbed the charts at record speed. Sad went on to hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, something XXXTentacion never achieved while alive. In fact, that single achievement alone placed him into a category most artists never reach, even after decades in the industry. After his death, Tentacion became one of the most streamed artists on the planet. Spotify reported massive increases across his entire catalog. His albums dominated the charts, with returning to #1 and his posthumous album Skins debuting at #1 as well. Award shows that once ignored him now honored him. His influence on emo rap, melodic trap, and youth culture was suddenly being discussed by the same media outlets that once dismissed him. Artists who previously avoided public association with him began acknowledging his impact. Kanye West, Travis Barker, and others openly praised his creativity and emotional honesty after his passing. Even critics who once attacked his music began reframing him as a complex figure whose art resonated deeply with a generation struggling with mental health, isolation, and identity. What's important here is that XXXTentacion's death didn't just preserve his legacy, it multiplied it. His fame didn't slowly grow over time, it detonated. He went from controversial internet star to cultural icon almost instantly. Concert footage, interviews, and unreleased songs were replayed and dissected endlessly, turning moments that once felt small into historical artifacts. Yet there's an uncomfortable truth underneath it all. Tentacion never lived to see the version of success people now associate with his name. He never experienced a world where he was universally recognized, chart dominant, and industry validated. His story became a blueprint for how death can transform an artist's narrative, sometimes erasing nuance and replacing it with mythology. And while Tentacion's rise after death was explosive, he wasn't the only artist whose legacy grew far beyond what they ever saw while alive. In fact, the next rapper on this list was on the verge of something big, but never got the chance to fully step into it. Juice WRLD. When Juice WRLD was alive, he was successful, but not legendary. He had hits, radio play, and a rapidly growing fan base, especially after Lucid Dreams broke into the mainstream. Still, at the time of his death in December 2019, Juice WRLD was widely seen as an artist still in his prime, not someone whose career had already peaked. His influence was growing, but the full scope of his impact hadn't been realized yet. Juice WRLD was known for his emotional vulnerability, freestyling ability, and open open discussions about drug use and mental health. Interviews showed him casually freestyling entire songs on the spot, something that impressed fans but didn't immediately translate into industry legend status. That perception changed instantly when news broke that Juice WRLD had died after suffering a seizure at Chicago's Midway Airport. Within hours, fans began revisiting lyrics that now felt prophetic, searching for meaning in lines they'd once ignored. His music took on a darker, heavier significance, and the conversation around him shifted from rising star to tragic voice of a generation. At the time of Juice WRLD's death, his career looked promising but unfinished. He had released 2 studio albums, both successful, but he hadn't yet reached the point where artists are permanently etched into hip-hop history. He was still touring heavily, recording obsessively, and openly talking about slowing down his lifestyle once he got older. To many fans, Juice WRLD felt like someone who was still figuring things out rather than someone whose legacy was already cemented. Once he passed, everything about how the world viewed Juice WRLD changed. Streaming platforms saw unprecedented surges across his catalog. Songs that were never pushed as singles began charting globally. His unreleased music, which had been circulating quietly among hardcore fans, suddenly became highly anticipated by the mainstream. Labels, media outlets, and critics began framing him not just as a hitmaker, but as a generational voice who captured the emotional chaos of young adulthood better than almost anyone else. His first posthumous album, Legends Never Die, debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and broke multiple streaming records. That album alone produced several top 10 singles and became one of the most streamed albums of the year across all genres. Juice WRLD was suddenly competing with artists who had spent decades building their audience, despite no longer being alive to promote or perform the music. What made Juice WRLD's posthumous fame especially striking was how much unreleased material he left behind. Reports from producers and engineers confirmed that he had recorded thousands of songs, often freestyling entire tracks in one take. This created a rare situation where his presence in the industry didn't fade after death. Instead, it continued, album after album, feature after feature, keeping his voice active in hip-hop long after he was gone.
Yeah, I worked a lot with Juice WRLD.
RP Juice, bro.
Yeah.
Nah.
He comes in, you press play on the beat. Instantly, he goes, all right, let me in. Does a full song. It's the best song you've ever heard. Then he says, do it again on the same beat. Then does another song, and it's the best song you've ever heard. And then he said, pick which one you like better. And then we do 8 songs in one day.
Artists like Eminem, Halsey, and The Weeknd openly praised Juice WRLD after his passing, acknowledging his influence on modern melodic rap and emo-infused hip-hop. Younger artists cited him as a major inspiration, and his lyrical honesty became a benchmark for emotional transparency in rap music. Yet, like many artists on this list, Juice WRLD never lived to see how deeply his music would connect once people viewed it through the lens of loss. Lyrics that once felt like exaggeration now felt painfully literal. Lines about addiction, death, and inner turmoil were replayed endlessly, turning his catalog into something closer to a diary than a discography. By the time fans fully realized how important Juice WRLD had become, he was already gone. His fame didn't just increase after death, it transformed his entire narrative, and that pattern repeats again with the next artist, whose rise after death was even more sudden and violent. Pop Smoke. Pop Smoke was gaining traction while he was alive, but his fame after death dwarfed anything he experienced in real time. Before his passing, Pop Smoke was primarily known within New York and drill circles. His deep voice, aggressive delivery, and Brooklyn drill sound had begun to influence the entire city's rap scene. But outside of hip-hop fans, his name still wasn't widely recognized. Songs like Welcome to the Party and Dior were buzzing heavily, especially in clubs and on social media. Yet Pop Smoke hadn't crossed into global superstardom. He was still early in his career, with one mixtape and a growing but limited mainstream footprint. He hadn't headlined major festivals, he hadn't dropped a full studio album, and he was still in the process of transitioning from local star to international artist. That trajectory was cut short in February 2020 when Pop Smoke was shot and killed during a home invasion in Los Angeles. The news shocked the industry. Video footage and news coverage spread quickly, and fans struggled to process process how someone with so much momentum could be gone so suddenly.
And everybody's talking about it. Police say suspects broke into his home and shot him. The home is on Hercules Drive in the Hollywood Hills.
After his death, Pop Smoke's music exploded globally. Dior became a worldwide anthem, played everywhere from protests to sporting events. His sound crossed borders, influencing artists in the UK, Europe, and beyond. What had once been a Brooklyn movement suddenly became an international wave. His posthumous album, Shoot for the Stars, Aim for the Moon, debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and stayed there for multiple weeks. That album featured collaborations with some of the biggest names in the industry, signaling how highly Pop Smoke was regarded once the industry fully embraced him. Songs like For the Night and Mood Swings dominated radio and streaming charts, far outperforming anything he released while alive. Pop Smoke became the face of Brooklyn drill after his death. Artists who followed his sound were constantly compared to him, and many openly admitted that his success paved the way for their own. Fashion brands, magazines, and award shows that hadn't worked with him while he was alive suddenly center him as a cultural icon. The most haunting part of Pop Smoke's story is how clearly it shows the difference between potential and recognition. While alive, he was climbing. After death, he arrived. His fame wasn't just bigger, it was definitive. And yet, like the others, he never got to experience it. As massive as Pop Smoke's posthumous rise was, the next rapper on this list had almost no mainstream recognition at all until after his death, making his case one of the most dramatic transformations yet. Lil Peep lived most of his career on the fringes of the mainstream. While alive, he was known primarily in underground and alternative rap communities. His music blended emo, punk, and hip-hop in a way that confused traditional rap audiences and kept major labels hesitant. He had a cult following, especially online, but he wasn't charting high, dominating radio, or receiving major industry validation. Despite touring and releasing music consistently, Lil Peep was often dismissed as a niche artist. His emotional vulnerability, aesthetic choices, and genre-blending sound placed him outside the conventional rap mold. He wasn't embraced by mainstream hip-hop media, and many people didn't take his influence seriously while he was still alive. Everything about Lil Peep's public perception changed after his death in November 2017. When Lil Peep died from an accidental overdose in November 2017, the reaction was immediate but confusing to outsiders. Many people hearing his name for the first time were surprised by how intense the fan response was. Social media flooded with tributes, fan edits, and unreleased snippets, revealing an underground audience far larger than most mainstream listeners realized existed. For many fans, Lil Peep wasn't just an artist, he was a voice that articulated emotions they didn't know how to express themselves. After his death, Lil Peep's music experienced a dramatic surge in streams. Songs that had quietly lived on SoundCloud suddenly appeared on major charts. His debut studio album, released posthumously, debuted in the top 5 of the Billboard 200, a level of success he had never reached while alive. His aesthetic, once mocked or dismissed, became widely influential, shaping fashion, visuals, and the emotional tone of an entire wave of artists. Media outlets that had ignored him began publishing long-form retrospectives, reinterpreting his work as pioneering rather than fringe. His blending of emo, punk, and hip-hop was now framed as groundbreaking. Artists who previously avoided association with his sound began acknowledging his influence openly, crediting him for helping make emotional vulnerability acceptable in modern rap. Lil Peep's legacy also grew through documentary footage, interviews, and behind-the-scenes clips that surfaced after his death. Fans dissected his lyrics line by line, often pointing out references to death and addiction that now felt disturbingly prophetic. While alive, those lines were dismissed as exaggerated sadness. After death, they became chilling reflections of someone struggling in real time. What ultimately cemented Lil Peep's posthumous fame was the way his music aged. Instead of fading, it became more relevant as mental health discussions grew louder in hip-hop. He went from being a niche artist to a symbol of an entire subculture, one that only fully recognized his importance once he was gone. As influential as Lil Peep became after his death, the next artist on this list represents an even sharper contrast between recognition while alive and legend status afterward. King Von. While King Von was alive, he was respected in drill circles and had a growing fan base, but he wasn't a mainstream star yet. His storytelling ability was praised, especially among Chicago rap fans, but his music was still largely consumed by people already familiar with drill culture. He hadn't crossed into the level of mainstream dominance that many of his peers were reaching. King Von's reputation was built on raw, vivid storytelling that felt closer to street journalism than entertainment. Songs like Crazy Story gained traction, but he was still viewed as an artist with potential rather than a finished product. Industry-wise, he was rising, but his full impact hadn't been felt yet. That changed overnight after his death in November 2020, following a shooting outside an Atlanta nightclub. News coverage spread rapidly, and footage of the aftermath circulated online, sparking debates, breakdowns, and widespread shock throughout the hip-hop community. After his passing, King Von's music experienced a massive surge. His storytelling tracks gained new attention as listeners revisited his lyrics with a different perspective. Songs that once felt like fictional street tales were now interpreted as autobiographical accounts. His albums climbed charts higher than they ever had while he was alive, and his name became central to discussions about drill music's realism and consequences. King Von also became a cultural reference point. Other rappers constantly mentioned him, paid tribute to him, or referenced his lyrics. Fans began treating his catalog like a historical archive, breaking down timelines, names, and events mentioned in his songs. That level of scrutiny and reverence didn't exist while he was alive. His fame didn't just grow, it transformed. King Von became a symbol of drill culture itself, often cited as one of the genre's most authentic voices. Yet, like the others on this list, he never got to experience the full scope of that recognition. As King Von's legend grew, another artist's name began circulating heavily online, one who was almost completely unknown to the mainstream before his death. MO3. MO3 was a regional artist with a loyal Texas fan base, but outside of that region, his name barely registered. While alive, he had consistent releases and local respect, but he hadn't broken into national conversations in a major way. His music resonated deeply with fans who connected to his emotional honesty, but his reach was limited. That changed in November 2020 when MO3 was shot and killed on a Dallas highway in a highly publicized incident. The shocking nature of the crime, combined with traffic camera footage and news reporting, caused his name to trend nationwide. After his death, MO3's music began charting for the first time. Songs that had been local hits suddenly gained national attention. Collaborations with larger artists received renewed interest, and fans outside Texas began discovering his catalog for the first time. MO3's story highlighted how regional artists can be overlooked until tragedy forces a spotlight onto their work. His fame after death far exceeded anything he experienced while alive, turning him into a cautionary tale about how quickly recognition can come and how cruelly late it sometimes arrives. And as tragic as MO3's rise was, the next artist on this list barely had a public career at all before becoming known worldwide. Speaker Knockers. Speaker Knockers was never a mainstream rapper while he was alive. His influence existed quietly, mostly behind the scenes, shaping sounds and flows that other artists would later adopt. While alive, he had a modest online presence and a dedicated but small fan base. His death in 2014 shocked those who were familiar with his work, but it wasn't until years later that his influence truly became visible. Speaker Knockers passed away in March 2014 at just 19 years old, reportedly from complications related to drug use. At the time of his death, there was no major media coverage, no charting albums, and no widespread discussion about his impact. To most of the hip-hop world, his passing went largely unnoticed, but something unusual happened in the years that followed. Slowly, Speaker Knockers' music began resurfacing online. Songs like Lonely, Dap You Up, and Rico's Story started appearing in YouTube recommendations, reposted on SoundCloud, and used in early Vine and Instagram edits. Younger listeners discovered his music without even realizing he had already passed. To them, he sounded current, not dated. As a new wave of melodic trap began dominating hip-hop, fans started tracing his roots back to Speaker Knockers. Artists openly credited him as an influence, noting his early use of emotional melodies, melodic hooks, and conversational flows. His sound, once ignored, suddenly felt foundational. Years after his death, Speaker Knockers became more famous than he ever was alive. His music accumulated accumulated hundreds of millions of streams. His name was mentioned in interviews by mainstream artists, and his catalog became required listening for fans interested in the evolution of modern rap. His influence was undeniable, even if his success came far too late. What makes Speaker Knocker's case especially tragic is that his rise wasn't triggered by media attention or controversy surrounding his death. It happened quietly, organically, through the music itself. He didn't become famous because people felt sorry for him. He became famous because people finally listened. And that pattern continues with the next rapper, whose name didn't mean much to the public until violence forced people to ask who he was. Capital Steez. Capital Steez was deeply respected in underground New York hip-hop circles, but outside of that space, he was virtually unknown. As a founding member of the Pro Era collective, he played a key role in shaping a movement that would later produce mainstream stars. Still, while alive, Capital Steez himself remained largely in the background. His music was dense, spiritual, and introspective, filled with references that required real engagement to understand. That complexity kept him from widespread popularity. He wasn't chasing hits or radio play, and as a result, his audience stayed small. In December 2012, Capital Steez died after falling from a building in New York City. His death shocked those who knew him, but initially, it didn't lead to major media attention or chart success. Once again, his name remained confined to underground discussions. Over time, however, Capital Steez's legacy grew. As Pro Era gained mainstream recognition, fans began looking back to understand where the movement started. They discovered Steez's work and realized how central he had been to the collective's identity and philosophy.
We got full control of it. That's why we're doing it at Godspeed.
Posthumously, his music gained new listeners who approached it with a deeper appreciation. Lyrics that once seemed abstract were now analyzed as reflections of his mental state and worldview. Discussions around mental health, spirituality, and artistic pressure brought renewed relevance to his catalog. Capital Steez never became a mainstream chart presence, but his influence expanded far beyond what he experienced while alive. He became a symbolic figure representing artistic purity and the cost of existing outside industry expectations. His fame wasn't loud or commercial, but it was lasting. As underground as Capital Steez's rise was, the next artist's case shows how internet culture can completely rewrite a rapper's relevance after death. KTS Vaughn. While alive, KTS Vaughn was almost completely unknown outside of a small Chicago drill audience. He didn't have industry backing, major releases, or mainstream attention. His music circulated mostly within tight-knit online communities, and even then, his reach was limited. When KTS Vaughn was murdered in 2020 in a highly publicized shooting, footage of the incident surfaced online and spread rapidly. The graphic nature of the footage sparked widespread discussion, not just about violence, but about who he was and what he represented. After his death, people began searching for his music, trying to understand the story behind the name. His songs saw massive increases in views and streams despite having minimal traction while he was alive. YouTube channels began breaking down his lyrics, his affiliations, and his background, turning him into a subject of online documentaries and discussions. KTS Vaughn's fame was almost entirely posthumous. His music became a reference point in conversations about drill culture, violence, and internet sensationalism. While his catalog remained small, his name became widely known, something that never happened during his lifetime. As disturbing as his story is, it highlights a recurring theme. Death doesn't just end careers in hip-hop, sometimes it begins them. Doe B. Doe B was a talented Alabama rapper affiliated with a rising Southern movement, but while alive, his career was still developing. He had regional respect and industry connections, yet he never reached widespread fame during his lifetime. His death in 2013 marked a turning point that would redefine how his music was received. Doe B was steadily building momentum before his death, but his name hadn't broken through nationally yet. He was closely associated with T.I. and the Hustle Gang movement, which gave him industry visibility, but visibility doesn't always translate to fame. While alive, Doe B was seen as a promising artist with potential, not someone already cemented in hip-hop history. In December 2013, Doe B was shot and killed outside a nightclub in Montgomery, Alabama. The news spread quickly through Southern rap circles, but it wasn't until after his death that many fans outside the region began paying attention. Interviews, old music videos, and unreleased tracks resurfaced online as people tried to understand who he was. was and why so many artists were publicly mourning him. After his passing, Doe B's music received significantly more attention than it ever had before. Songs that previously flew under the radar saw major increases in streams and views. Features with well-known artists were revisited, now framed as missed opportunities for a career that never fully unfolded. Fans began treating his catalog as unfinished work rather than overlooked work. Artists spoke about Doe B's character and work ethic in interviews, emphasizing that his death cut short something that could have been much bigger. That narrative became central to his posthumous reputation. He wasn't remembered for chart positions or accolades, but for potential, a recurring theme among many artists on this list. Over time, Doe B became a respected name among hip-hop fans who dug into Southern rap history. His fame didn't reach the level of mainstream superstardom, but it undeniably exceeded anything he experienced while alive. His story represents the quieter end of this phenomenon, where recognition comes late and lingers in niche spaces rather than exploding globally. And when you step back and look at all these stories together, a disturbing pattern starts to emerge. These artists didn't suddenly become better after they died. The music didn't change, the talent didn't improve. What changed was attention. In many cases, death forced listeners, media, and the industry to stop scrolling and finally listen. Tragedy created urgency, and urgency created fame. Some of these rappers were on the verge of massive success. Others were barely known at all, but the result was the same. Their names became bigger after their lives ended than they ever were while they were breathing. Streams replaced applause, tributes replaced conversations, and careers that should have grown naturally instead froze in time, preserved forever at the moment the world finally noticed them. There's something uncomfortable about that reality. Hip-hop prides itself on authenticity and storytelling, yet time and time again, it takes death for artists to be fully heard. The question isn't whether these rappers deserve fame, it's why it came so late and why the pattern keeps repeating. Because for every artist on this list, there are dozens more whose voices never reached the volume they deserved, alive or dead. And all of their deaths followed a similar story: drug abuse and death at a young age. For all these Bayans watching this video thinking your use won't end this bad, get some help. It's not the way you want to live if you want to see your 40s or even 30s. Stay safe and stay healthy, because your life and people around you are the only valuable things in this world. Nothing else matters. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, hit the like button, click on the cards displayed on your screen to see more awesome videos, and don't miss out on the next releases. See ya.